Nearly 60 years after a young girl was mysteriously found dead in a shed behind her family's Marble Falls home, a KXAN investigation is leading to a change in her case. On this week's Inside the Investigation, Director of Investigations and Innovation Josh Hinkle explains the new legislation sparked by his reporting. Josh, welcome back to Inside the Investigation.
Thanks for having me again.
Well, Josh, you're back here today to give us an update on your investigation, a hanging on Backbone Creek. For those of you who did not get a chance to watch this report, I highly suggest that you do. And we actually have a little bit of a preview of that investigation right now.
It just always was a story that haunted all of us. Anyone that was living in Marble Falls in November 1965 has a memory of this happening to this beautiful young girl. The young girl that was murdered down by Backbone Creek.
You were in the same grade as Daynon Lewis.
Yes.
We were in the 8th grade.
She had beautiful blonde hair, and she was extremely quiet.
She was found in a small shed behind the house, hanging from a rafter or something, but her knees were touching the ground. Well, it didn't take, much imagination to figure out something's wrong.
I don't think anybody really believed that it was a suicide at the time.
I don't think she died by her own hand.
Somebody that was visiting the neighborhood had some peeping Tom issues, was staying within a few houses of Daynon's family.
There were other theories other than what was listed on the death certificate.
I do have a copy of the death certificate.
First off, I would have sent the child for an autopsy.
In the absence of a medical examiner, the Justice of the Peace is responsible.
Are you comfortable enough coming up with a manner of death, cause of death?
The death investigation system that started back in the 19th century.
Like the Dark Ages to the modern world.
Is it time to figure out a different system?
At this point, I feel comfortable with what I do.
A Justice of the Peace is an elected office.
Yes, it is an elected office, yes.
Politics does play a role in everything. They're all trying to not have a bunch of unsolved cases laying around. It just seemed more of a fanciful cover-up, if nothing else.
I think Daynon was such an innocent soul.
She was murdered.
I would love to see it solved.
Maybe we could find the truth.
Online now, A Hanging on Backbone Creek, the complete digital investigation. Watch the entire docuseries, explore the Daynon Lewis mystery and other reports on Texas's Justice of the Peace system, and more, including an update on how our questions could soon lead to change at the state capitol. And don't forget to listen to a new season of our Catalyst podcast, where we take a closer look at this 60-year-old case and how our team pieced the evidence together. Just go to kxan.com/Backbone Creek.
You asked in that preview this question, is it time for a new system? And I feel like your update is really the answer to that. So please tell us what's happened since you've published that.
Well, the whole system idea wasn't even what sparked us to do this investigation. That kind of came secondary when we realized that this was such a big problem. Our former investigative photojournalist and friend, Ben Freeberg, who is actually from Marble Falls, tipped me off to this story. Ronnie Lewis, the gentleman that you saw in that trailer, he actually writes a blog post called the Angora Chronicles, and he kind of just writes about whatever he wants to about the history of the Marble Falls area, and he went to school with Daynon Lewis, the young girl who died in our story. And when I read that, I was like, ooh, this is kind of an interesting story. It seems like something maybe we want to look into. When we got her death certificate, it said that a justice of the peace had done her death inquest, had investigated her death, but there was no autopsy that was performed. And so all of that seemed a little bit strange. And I'm not originally from Texas, so I didn't know exactly how the system worked, even though I've lived here for a long time. And I just assumed medical examiners were always used whenever there was a natural death, a death that happened when no one else was around. And so when I learned that a justice of the peace could actually investigate deaths in Texas, that kind of got us looking into other things. And at the same time, our colleague Arzo Dost, who's an investigative reporter on our team, was working on a related story about the Justice of the Peace system in Williamson County, which is just on the north side of Austin, because it's a growing county and its Justices of the Peace are stretched to handle all of the death inquests that they have there. So they've been advocating for a medical examiner's office. And I was like, wow, these two stories are kind of together. Yeah. And so that's really what got us started on this whole system. And we launched the investigation and came out with it, everything you just saw, the podcast, all of that, back in November of last year. And a couple of months later, here we are. We have this big update with what's happening at the state capitol related to the system, and a major update with what's happening with Daynon Lewis's case.
Let's watch.
An update now to our investigative project, A Hanging on Backbone Creek. Nearly 60 years after a young girl mysteriously died in Marble Falls, there's new movement in her case. In 1965, Daynon Lewis was found hanging by a jump rope in a shed behind her family's home, and a local elected Justice of the Peace, who had no medical background and didn't order an autopsy, ruled it an accident. Many who knew this 13-year-old never believed she was responsible for her own death, instead suspecting someone else could have killed her. Based on the evidence we uncovered, a new JP submitted an update to the Texas Department of State Health Services to amend Daynon's death certificate. The document now officially says the manner of death could not be determined and clarifies Daynon was found on her knees with a rope tied around her neck. An amendment her loved ones say honors her dignity.
Why was it so important for you to see Daynon's death certificate updated?
There was just no way that it was an accident, and it just led me and many others to, always question it. When I was contacted by you, it just kind of got things more in focus again. It just kind of resolves things a little bit, just knowing that she didn't do it to herself intentionally or otherwise.
What does it mean after almost 60 years that we were able to get this done?
I think for me personally, it takes away the shroud of any thought of suicide. It removes it totally. You have helped clear some confusion from 60 years. The fog is thinner now. From my part of the family, we appreciate your efforts and what you have uncovered and what you have done. That's awesome. Thank you.
Daynon's case helped us expose an antiquated 200-year-old system throughout Texas, where most counties still use JPs to investigate deaths, with little training and scant forensic knowledge. That system led us to state lawmakers who, after our reporting, will soon consider new legislation just filed that could mean less reliance on JPs in Texas. They already have several other court-related duties. Instead, there would be more opportunities to utilize medical examiners, doctors schooled specifically in conducting autopsies. SB 1370, the bill just filed by Republican Senator Tan Parker, would lower the population from 2.5 million to just 1 million people as the proposed threshold requiring counties to establish a medical examiner's office. Today, there are just 7 counties in the state with a population of 1 million or more, and they already all have medical examiners serving them. The Texas Demographic Center predicts 5 more counties will surpass 1 million people by 2060. That includes booming Williamson County, where after our reporting about overworked JPs doing death investigations there, officials recently purchased property for a future medical examiner office. Fort Bend and Montgomery counties will also likely hit the 1 million mark by 2060, but in recent years, officials there chose to establish their own ME offices, just like several other counties currently below the population threshold, even though they weren't required. Some even formed a medical examiner district made up of 4 counties in North Texas. That's something Parker's bill also aims to expand and put into statute, the possibility of neighboring counties, no matter their population, sharing an ME office. It's an official way to allow such agreements to jointly operate and maintain the service, which could help counties nearing 1 million people save money and share expertise.
And just make it easier for counties to have partnerships that are collaborative with neighboring counties or other entities to provide those services to the people they're blessed to represent. So it's always a balance between protecting the needs of the taxpayer while at the same time doing the right thing by our people.
And it appears this bill could have bipartisan support, as Parker's Democratic colleague, Senator Sarah Eckhart, tells us. Eckhart, a former county judge in Travis County, which has a long-established ME office, said relying on JPs for death investigations throughout most of the state, a system unlike any other in the country, is outdated.
Our JPs are really struggling, and we've seen way too many errors relying on individuals who, God love them, they're not equipped to make these calls. This is leading to unjust results in the criminal justice context.
Eckhart said she's open to discussing Parker's bill with him, but also acknowledges staffing more medical examiner offices could be challenging. Experts tell us there are fewer than 1,000 doctors with this specialty actively practicing in the U.S. No doubt that will come up if this bill progresses this session, adding another layer to the debate over death, something that will eventually impact every Texan. We'll keep you updated. Until then, check out our complete coverage, docuseries, and podcast at kxan.com/Backbone Creek. Josh Hinkle, KXAN Investigates.
Josh, that's an incredible update, especially after all this time. What was your reaction when you heard that they were making this amendment?
Well, first off, I have to give a lot of credit for that update to our investigative producer, Dalton Huey. He's really kept in contact with the Justice of the Peace, Deborah Bensel, who is in Marble Falls, who really ushered this update through after she was interviewed by us and then saw the evidence that we'd collected in the Daynon Lewis case. And she was very understanding and open to what these family members and friends of Daynon Lewis had gone through for 60 years, and the death certificate just didn't make sense. And so I think being able to recognize that and figure out what the process was to change something that happened so long ago was a little bit difficult, and something that she had to learn how to do because it was not typical. But once that happened, it was really pleasing to Ronnie Lewis and Darlene Ostermeyer, who you saw in the update there that we interviewed over Zoom. Darlene was her cousin, just a couple of years older than Daynon, so she was very close to what happened. And Ronnie Lewis always remembered this just as it happened because he was a classmate of Daynon Lewis. And so, it's just one of those mysteries that happens, and no one ever really quite knew what had happened in Marble Falls, and it just went on for 60 years. So having that finality and understanding that officially the state, a new Justice of the Peace, is willing to amend the death certificate to make the narrative a little bit different, kind of honors Daynon Lewis's memory, because previously the way that the former Justice of the Peace back in the 60s had written it, it made it seem like Daynon had caused the death herself somehow. And they just didn't feel like that was fair, because that's not the Daynon that they remember. And they don't think that that was fair. Maybe someone did kill her. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe it was, something that they're going to never know. But on paper now, it doesn't look like Daynon did this to herself, that there was another cause that couldn't be determined.
It leaves open the possibility of other circumstances. You talked to her cousin, and it's incredible that her classmate would have such an impact on him that he would still be trying to get to the root of it. What does the rest of her family think about this update?
Well, Darlene is her cousin, a couple years older, and after this happened back in 1965, Daynon's family that we have been able to figure out from like real estate records and from just talking with the couple of people that we've been able to track down since then, they didn't stay in Marble Falls very long after that. You can imagine the death of a loved one, a child especially, is pretty tragic and could really uproot a family and maybe make you want to start over. So they moved away from Marble Falls. It kind of split the family up a little bit, and we have been able to track down Daynon's mother, who is living in Texas still, and one of her brothers who's also still alive. They didn't want to talk to us for the story on the record, but we have kept in contact with them because we felt like it was the respectful thing to do when you're going to be digging into this dark history of what's happened inside a family and a community, just kind of giving them a heads up about what we were working on. And I think that they were pleased that this update came out, but it's still something that's difficult to talk about even 60 years later because it was so close to them and something that changed their lives forever.
And so young, I'm imagining it's always going to be incredibly painful.
Yeah.
You talked about kind of the narrative now that's on the record, which as journalists, and I'm sure any historians who might be watching, it's so important what's left on the record about something. But I'm curious, does it have any other implications for the case? Is this now considered a cold case?
Well, that kind of really depends on what law enforcement would want to do at this point. Back in 1965, there was no Marble Falls Police Department. And so they did call in the Texas Rangers and Burnett County, they called them lawmen in the newspaper archive, but it was like Burnett County Sheriff's Office. And they did some, initial investigative things, but when it came down to it, the Justice of the Peace was the one that was able to make that decision and that ruling. So now that this has changed, in theory, law enforcement could look at this and it no longer says accident, it says could not be determined. So if new evidence did present itself that there was a crime that was committed in this and someone came forward maybe with more information or, admitted to doing something, then law enforcement would have reason to possibly reopen this case. At this time, we have not heard that that's a possibility, but, this is a very early thing also because this death certificate was just changed and we're just getting word out about it. So I've heard from a lot of people in the community who feel like they know what happened, that they have theories, that there was something that was always talked about. So who knows what might happen, but the door is wide open.
Okay. Well, kind of shifting now to this idea of there being more medical examiner offices, there'll need to be more medical examiners. And you talked about that in your story. Are there a bunch of qualified folks waiting in the wings, or is there more challenge there?
When we first started working on this, we wanted to kind of understand more about what goes into being a medical examiner and how many of them there are in the nation. So our colleague David Barrera, an investigative producer, we spoke over the phone with the vice president of the National Association of Medical Examiners, who actually used to be a medical examiner in Texas. And he said that, there's really only about between 750 and 1,000 active practicing forensic pathologists, which is the technical term for a medical examiner in the United States right now. So you can imagine that's not very many, especially when you kind of start doing the math. Texas has 254 counties. If we were to ever get a medical examiner in every single county, that would pretty much be like a third of all of the medical examiners that we currently have practicing in the United States. I'm not saying that's ever going to happen because there's still a large population threshold. And so most counties are far, far, far from having a medical examiner in Texas. But that's the reality where it stands.
How interesting. Okay, and we heard from Senator Eckhart. She brought up the errors that are happening when JPs sometimes handle these inquests. Has there ever been a state audit to try to figure out how often errors are happening?
No. In short, no, because it's such a complex system. There is no statewide system, like one thing that they could track all of these on, because all of the counties use different systems. They do have to report deaths to the Department of State Health Services, but that's not something that is like regularly tracked in the way that you would want to understand if there were problems that were happening with this system. So what we've seen in recent years through other reporting is there have been problems with justices of the peace that didn't have a lot of training, who might have let politics kind of slip into things. We've seen with the state division that actually looks at the discipline for justices, that some have been disciplined related to death inquests, but that doesn't happen very often. It's hard to catch these things, and it usually takes something like COVID-19 deaths or people paying attention to immigrant deaths for someone to raise it. If you haven't checked out Lisa Olson from Texas Observer, she has been tracking a lot of like those kind of things, like immigrant deaths, deaths along the border, deaths related to justices of the peace. Texas Observer, Lisa Olson, Google it. It's really worth a read because that really opens your eyes to realize if no one's looking, there can be problems that happen.
So this legislation, which is excellent to see a lawmaker pay attention to one of our investigations and act on it, this bill that he's filed, do you feel like it has a good chance of passing? Does he feel confident in its ability to pass?
I think so. He seems pretty confident because he's had a history with legislation related to medical examiners in the past. He's been a senator for a while, but a state representative before that up in the Dallas area, Denton County, Tarrant County, all that district. And he has actually, in past sessions, helped solidify the partnership that was kind of described for that regional medical examiner district up there between 4 counties. The medical examiner office in Tarrant County actually serves 3 other counties, and it's Johnson, Parker, and Denton counties, and they all are able to have satellite offices in their counties, but the main medical examiner, where that medical examiner is staffed, is in Tarrant County. So they kind of share the costs, share the workload, those kind of things. And he helped solidify that. So as those counties approached the previous population threshold, they weren't required to get their own medical examiner. It was kind of a deal that was worked out special for them, which is really what his legislation now is partly trying to do, is expand the possibility of those kind of partnerships for neighboring counties to be able to do that. If you're coming close to that population threshold, you don't have to spend millions and millions and millions of dollars building your own medical examiner office when you could really partner on the services that a neighboring county already has or could help you build.
Well, my favorite thing about the legislative session being here is that we will know soon what's going to happen and if it's going to be successful. So I know your team and our entire team upstairs is going to be watching to see that. Thank you so much for joining us. And again, if you haven't gotten a chance to really look at all of this reporting, this is a case, or this is a story that I think can touch everyone, unfortunately, at some point. So please check it out. Go to KXAN.com under the investigations tab. And as always, be sure to join us here on Friday at 10:30 a.m. for Inside the Investigation. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you, Kelly.